buildinggreenwichct.com.
Do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, guys. This is Scott Elwell here with my co-host, Lindsay Potter.
Hello. Welcome to Building Greenwich.
And we're here with Ryan Fazio today, State Senator, 36th District. I'll let you sort of dive in and tell us who you are.
Was it Fazio or Fazio?
I think on the boat on Ellis Island, it was Fazio. So
Okay.
we're all
Fazio?
downstream from wrong pronunciations. I say Fazio.
Okay, Fazio.
Okay.
Great.
Fazio.
And you are our current state senator for our district here in Greenwich, Stamford, and New Canaan, correct?
Northern Stamford.
Northern Stamford. So 100,000 people, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Awesome. But you also grew up in Greenwich.
Correct.
Which is a very fun little factoid, and that is why we have you here on this podcast. So tell us what it was like growing up here in town.
Well, it was great growing up in town. We lived in a couple other towns in Fairfield County, but we moved here when I was 8, and went to the public schools here: Parkway, Western Middle School, Greenwich High. Graduated in 2008, and in many ways, I think my experiences growing up here were more formative than anything else, any other experiences in my life, making me kind of who I am, and especially I think at Greenwich High School. I loved the fact that Greenwich was a big town, a diverse town. You especially see that on the west side of town. And intellectually, Greenwich High School was a bustling place, and always surrounded myself with people who were intellectually curious there, and teachers who were interested in ideas, and constantly we were debating ideas and politics and philosophy and economics. And in some ways, it was so intellectually robust when I was there that it was even more so than when I was at university at Northwestern.
Lindsay, you went to Greenwich High. Was it all political and intellectual?
I graduated in the mid-'90s, and there were aspects of that, yes. For me, I was more into the athletics, but there's so much of everything at Greenwich High School. And I was at Glenville School, Central Middle School, Greenwich High School. That was my path. So I also spent time on both sides of town, and I loved being at the high school. What house were you in?
I was in Cantor House, so I was one of the new Cantor House people when it was formed in the 2000s.
Right, because Cantor didn't exist when I was there. I was a Folsom House girl, and
How many houses are there?
there are 5 now. So there's Folsom, Bella, Clark, and Sheldon, and then Cantor was added after we left. I don't remember which year it was added. But it took over the library, the library was, I believe, where Cantor is now, but they've moved things around. So Folsom House, when you walk into Greenwich High Schools, when you walk through the glass corridor that they're reconstructing right now, actually Werner Construction, my brother's company, we're sitting in their office right now, rebuilding the front of Greenwich High School. And when you walk through that glass corridor, you get to the student center. It's a 1 square acre cement floor, like tables, chairs, trees, and these huge winding staircases. So the academic houses, there are 2 when you first walk in on your right, and then across this big space there are 2 others, and then Cantor is either dead ahead or on the left. I haven't been in the high school in a long time. It's left still. Okay. Yeah. That's where the library was. But to your point, I graduated with a class of 650 kids. It was probably more when you graduated, I'm sure.
Mine's probably one of the biggest graduating classes ever. It was around 750.
It's huge.
Because I'm the 1990 birth cohort, where it's like that's where the highest population or birth cohort, other than maybe one of the boomer years is.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
1991. So we were like the population peak.
Wow. Cool.
Random demographic.
That is a random demographic. I didn't know that, but 100 more kids in a graduating class is a big
and now it's
big
smaller.
Number.
I think it's in the high 600s.
Yeah.
Now I'm not positive.
But it's not 600 every year gross, doesn't it? I mean, I'm trying to think because you're not. What's the gross population of Greenwich High?
It's probably 2,500
It is,
or 2,400. Okay. When I was there, it was probably 2,700. So it was the second biggest high school in the state after Danbury. I mean, it was also part of that experience. I loved it there.
Yeah.
Maybe I went to a fewer parties, and that's why I'm always fixated on my debate club experience and my
Lindsay didn't.
I didn't go to any. I didn't host parties. I didn't go to parties.
I still there's this famous or infamous like giant party at the end of our senior year that like cops broke up and everyone goes, scattering. And, those are just like some of those vintage, like out of a movie high school experiences.
I definitely had.
Tell me you were at the library.
Well, it's good. It's good to know that where you are now did start when you were younger, and so then you were at Northwestern after you left Greenwich High School. You did your time at undergrad. How did you decide the path for me is going to be in politics and get to where you are today?
Well, I'd always been interested in government and American history, and especially public policy and economic policy, and the ways that good or bad policy can improve kind of the most important outcomes in people's lives, their material standard of living, especially whether they're free, prosperous, happy society. Like we were talking before, the things that everybody wants. They want bread on their table. They want safety. They want prosperity. They want a degree of freedom and community. So I was always interested in those kind of big questions of how policy and government and attitudes can shape those outcomes. But after college, I went into the private sector primarily, and I worked mostly in commodities trading. I focused mostly in that 10-year period on renewable energy. So grains, shipping, renewable energy. I was basically in that industry, trading them and moving them around the world. And it was a very global industry, so it was very interesting. So you see everything from, you go to farms in the middle of the country, and then you are talking to, and then you're going to rural China and Beijing. And so you also see the kind of like diversity of cultures around the country, which is one of the really cool things about being in that industry. But eventually, I was working in Stanford. I was living here in 2019 to 2020. And, I just got it in my heart that I was relatively disappointed with the economic state of play in Connecticut and the economic policy in Connecticut. And I just saw us in a state where the cost of living was constantly going up, and there weren't jobs created. There wasn't real income growth in the state. Poverty had gone up. And
what years are we right now?
We're 2024. Well,
no, not today. In your
August
history,
2024 right now.
Just a second.
In the history you're talking about.
1920, right?
Yeah, 2019 is kind of when I started thinking about it.
Well, I mean, Greenwich has had a shift right, left, since I've been here. I mean, I was born and raised here too, so I'm just trying to date the conversation.
Yeah, and that was post
pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic,
right around the pandemic, right before the pandemic. So politically, Greenwich had already kind of gone through its pretty significant shift to the left, which is similar and predictive by how the demographics politically have changed across the country, where kind of the high income areas, the high income suburbs especially, have shifted left, and the more rural kind of working class areas in the country have shifted right. That's I guess that's part of the story, because the seat that I ran for and eventually won was flipped from Republican to Democrat in 2018.
Right.
But I just those were the issues that I cared about, and I just, had it in my heart that, if you wanted to do good for your community, do good for your state, and you're passionate about something, you should try to, do the job yourself and give back yourself. So, I switched gears and decided to run for the state Senate in 2020.
From doing the commodities trading.
Correct.
Interesting. And what was that shift like?
Obviously it was a major change. It was a risk, but I was taking a step back in that career, and eventually I went to work for. I also went to work where I still work at a small kind of investment company where I'm helping with some of the financial analysis and investment decisions, helping small and medium-sized companies grow. But it was certainly I left an industry I really enjoyed and liked, and so certainly it was a risk personally, but. It's been totally worth it. I think you just know in your heart, when you're doing something that's purposeful and meaningful, and it's worth all the sort of, costs associated with it. And, it's been the best experience of my life.
That's fantastic. Can you tell us what a state senator does?
That was
in like a 36th district.
What's the job?
What is the job?
You make laws for the state of Connecticut, and you try to represent your constituents, both in terms of the laws and policies made at the state level, and also servicing them with the existing government programs that are being kind of enforced and executed. So I would say primarily it's lawmaking, policymaking, and also constituent service for the state government.
Fair enough.
And how many others do you work with on a daily, weekly basis to make these decisions representing the state? So, you're representing District 36. How many different districts are there?
There's 36 state Senate districts.
Oh.
So it's easy to remember.
Yep.
And there are 151 state House seats. So the composition of the state government is very, very similar, mirroring the federal government, the three branches of government, the unitary executive with the governor's office and all the administrative agencies, bureaucracies underneath the governor's office, court system with the state Supreme Court, and a bicameral legislature with the Senate and a House. And, laws originate and are passed through the legislature. They're debated. They're introduced by individual legislators, and they're debated in the committees. They're amended. It's a more kind of organic bottom-up legislative process than how things have become in the Congress, in the federal government. Yeah. Which is one of the reasons I enjoy it, because even as a member of the minority party, I'm a Republican in the state Senate, and it's 24-12 there, so it's a pretty large majority. I was still able in the past 2 years to introduce and pass 6 laws, obviously with bipartisan support, because there is still an element, especially in state government, where you're finding common ground, solving problems, and there is a organic entrepreneurial bottom-up process where individual legislators, regardless of their party or where they're from, can introduce good ideas and bring people together and pass those into law if they're able to kind of build those coalitions legislatively. So, that's one of it's been a more positive experience than I expected because of that type of experience.
Fair enough. And now that we're in an election period, it's sort of a two-part question. How does that change your job and your effort and the time, your day to day, and also at what time did you start planning into the election? And just sort of high level
for the campaign.
Yeah, for the campaign. Like, when did you start thinking, okay, I've got to start campaigning? And then now that we're pretty deep into it, what is the day to day on that?
So most of the legislative session is in the first half of the year. Okay. Both in the even numbered and odd number year. The terms are 2 years long. So January to June or February to May, roughly, is when the full-time legislative session happens. So you're having legislative meetings, public hearings, committee meetings, and the full House and Senate are in session roughly from the winter through the spring. So really you're campaigning every 2 years in the summer and especially hard in the fall. Yeah. So there's really no time to campaign in the spring or the winter, even if you were going to. But you try to do your best. I am generally of the belief and of the hope that, if you do a good job as the sitting senator or representative, that is reflected in how people view you at the ballot box. So I do think the voters in this area are very highly informed compared to most voters. Mm-hmm. They know, my experience on the campaign trail. They know who I am. They generally have an idea of some of the state issues that are important, which I think is very unique and very impressive here. The voter turnout is very high in the area.
Very high.
So I think you'll probably see higher than 80% voter turnout in Greenwich this year, which is downright Scandinavian in the levels of turnout. So,
I assume that also turnout directly correlates with how close the presidential election is, and if it's a landslide, I would assume if it's an expected landslide, turnout's lower.
That's probably a variable at play, but if you look like the 2020, the COVID presidential election was the highest turnout since in like 100 years in the country.
Really?
So the interest in politics, for better or for worse, in the past 10 years has gone up. It might often be for worse because people kind of view now politics a little bit more like it's cultural, it's religious in some ways. So it might be for the worse, but say in 2000, which was a close election, I think the voter turnout was like 50%, which ironically in our mayoral elections, in our first selectman town elections in odd numbered years here, we hover around 50%. So the turnout in Greenwich is so high that in our odd-numbered year local elections, we have turnout that is around as high as some of the lowest turnout presidential elections have been nationally.
That's incredible.
Wow.
Another random.
It's good.
Demographic
Good fact. No, there was voting that happened this past week, right?
Correct.
And that
for
was
a primary.
Right. And what was that for?
On the Republican side, it was to nominate candidate for U.S. Congress and for the U.S. Senate. So to run against Jim Himes and Chris Murphy. And there were in Stamford some state house primaries in more heavily Democratic districts downtown Stamford. So in our area, those were what people were going to the polls for on primary day.
Any big surprises? What just happened?
There were two sitting incumbent state representatives in Stamford who were unseated. There's been a lot of kind of interscene party warfare in Stamford the past few years. It seems to be that one of the factions is winning. The more kind of establishment faction, and the Stamford Democratic Party is winning over the more kind of populistic faction. So that's kind of an interesting story in and of itself.
And how did they get my cell phone number?
But I hate to break it to you, but anyone running for office probably does.
I'm a real estate agent. It's out there already, but
it's okay. I'm a real estate agent.
The amount of times I text people stop
I know.
during the day is innumerable.
And now I'm starting to get emails too.
I meant it by
stop.
my phone is online.
Yes,
My
yes.
phone number is.
There is a do
all
not
over,
call that you
so.
could go to, but for politics, I think that I do get blanketed texts.
Yeah.
It's fine. I mean, it's interesting to know, and I think as citizens of our community, we should all be in the know and be educated, which is why I'm glad we're sitting here to talk with you. Because if I can bring up the topic of electricity, which we've all been talking about, I think everyone for this past week since this.
Can I say that's a hot topic?
It's a hot topic. It's very timely that we have you on the show this week because I want to learn more. The media tends to twist things and turn things, and you don't really know what to believe these days with politics, which has been challenging in the past 5 years because it does divide us so deeply in ways that it never did in the past, in my opinion. But can you tell us what's going on from where you sit with this electricity issue and how you can make a difference for our people in our community? Because it's a big problem.
Yes.
And start high level with a pass to what's going on.
Please.
So Connecticut has the third highest electricity rates in the entire country after Hawaii and California. So set aside the month-to-month changes, which are important, but set them aside to zoom out and get a 30,000-foot view of the situation. Connecticut has the third highest electricity rates in the entire country, which I think is a problem because there are some built-in reasons that you would expect us to have higher electricity rates than some of the other parts of the country, but having the third highest, the highest in New England, the highest in the Northeast, actually the highest east of California, I think is a problem and indicative of the fact that there are state policies that are contributing to us having higher electricity rates than the rest of the country. Now, in the past month, people have opened up, I think, their electricity bills appalled, and understandably so, because from a high base, those rates went up. The bills went up, especially because the usage increased in July, but the rates also went up, which is actually more of a surprise because the wholesale price of natural gas, the wholesale price of power on kind of the competitive traded market, the same way that gasoline has a competitive traded market, actually went down over the last several months. So you would have expected the rates to go down just based on that. So yeah, higher usage, but lower rates I would have expected. Instead, you had slightly higher rates that people were using at a higher usage, a higher volume. So that was the problem. Part of the reason for that is because the public benefits, you'll notice in your electricity bill, there's 4 categories of charges. Supply, which is the cost of buying electricity on the open market, the competitive market we were talking about. Transmission, which is federally regulated. Those are the high voltage wires at a higher altitude. You'll notice near the train tracks, for instance, in Greenwich. The distribution costs, which is the state regulated, the pure regulated utility infrastructure costs, the wires that basically go to your home, the substations, transformers, and so on that go into your home. And then finally, the public benefits charge, which are the cost of 15 different government passed policies that contribute to your electricity bill as well. And in this period, it was that section of your bill, the fourth section of your bill, that went up. You'll also, if you're watching closely your electricity bill over the last year, it used to be that there was just two categories of charges laid out on your bill, supply and distribution. So transmission and public benefits were embedded in those different costs, so there was less transparency.
Right.
There's actually a law that I passed last year that ensures that there is the four categories laid out for you in your bill, whereas before they were kind of buried in two more general categories.
So you see every line item and know this is specifically for that. Okay.
Yes, and so I wanted consumers to have more transparency, so I pushed hard for that to be passed into law. So now you see the four different categories that you were always charged for, but now that are laid out in your bill. And even then, go ahead.
What category are we talking about that we're so much higher than the other states?
So if you ask, say, the Pura chairwoman, the head regulator in Connecticut, she'll say that distribution's a little higher and that public benefits are clearly higher.
Okay.
So the public benefits are clearly playing a role in us having higher rates than the rest of the country. And yes, I'm glad that we're able to make it more transparent in your electricity bill in the last year to have four categories instead of two. But public benefits itself has 15 different line items in it. So I have a spreadsheet on my computer that I've been sending to a few people of like the 15 different line items for government programs that are being funded through that part of your electricity bill. Some of them are fixed price contracts for electricity that are higher than the market. Some of them are a little higher than the market. Some of them are way higher than the market.
Right.
But this is blatantly a state thing as opposed to the actual. So it's not an Eversource thing. It's a state of Connecticut thing.
It's the state government, the state legislature, and the governors impose policies that are paid for through your electricity bill. I think it is reasonable to describe it in some ways as a hidden tax because it's almost like a government budget by itself. Normally, a lot of these programs would get funded through the budgetary process, your taxes, and then every 2 years, the state government starts from scratch and debates a budget of $26 billion. Well, this is like a $500 million budget that's automatically kind of funded through your electricity bills. It's mostly related to energy and environment and other and bureaucracy related to those things. So it's somewhat germane, but it doesn't have to be relitigated every 2 years, which I think is healthy because in that process, you have transparency and you're debating things and you're vetting them for the costs and benefits. So a year and a half ago, I co-authored a 5-point plan that I think would reduce electricity costs in the long run. And one of my arguments is that a lot of those public benefits charges should not be funded as a matter of course through your electricity bill, but they should be put into the normal budgetary process where some of them, maintain themselves and are funded that way, but others are pared down. But at least they're investigated, they're litigated in that way every 2 years.
Is there? I hope that we don't lower this and raise real estate taxes or something like this to try to make up for any kind of compensation.
I totally agree, and taxes are already too high in Connecticut. Yeah. Taxes are the second high. We're the second highest taxes in the country and the third highest electricity rates. The reason that I think if you just put the debate over those programs into the budgetary process, that it won't raise your taxes is because we still have a spending cap in this state. So spending since 2017, we had an 1818 Senate, and when Scott France was in office, and he actually co-wrote some of the fiscal guardrails in the state that limit spending year to year to increase at most at the rate of household income growth or inflation.
Okay.
And so if you keep those spending caps in place, putting another program into the debate over the budget cannot raise the overall level of spending because you still have these overarching spending caps.
Well, I mean, specifically for your district, I love talking about real estate taxes. I mean, it's a third of our neighbors. Correct. And so, I mean, the Greenwich real estate tax is on a dollar per million of asset value. I think we're the lowest in the state.
Yeah, lowest or second. I think it's one or Salisbury or something like that.
But it is if we're going to compensate by raising real estate taxes, let's not.
Yeah, and that brings up another topic of like affordability of housing because Connecticut, if you look on a statewide basis, has in the top 5 for highest property taxes in the country. And so you look at, like, I was looking at West Hartford the other day. It's like 50 mils,
Yeah.
which is that's a nice suburban town with a real property tax
Yeah.
base, and it's like 50 mils. And so
What does that mean? 50 mils.
that's basically, it's 1 mil is like 0.1%. So it's like 5% of the 70% of the assessed value.
Okay.
So, I would say that this is how I would describe it. Connecticut has more than twice the average real estate taxes, property taxes of the average state. If it was equal to the average state, then that would probably equate to 3% of the average person's income in lower taxes every year.
Whereas Greenwich is about 11 mil.
Wow.
I mean, our mill rate
Wow.
is
Yeah.
so. Our real estate taxes on a relative to value are fantastic. I mean, it's a topic we love talking about for
Yeah.
real estate. So $1 million house in Greenwich will pay roughly 70% of 11,000, so about $7,500 a
Okay.
year, which on a national basis is crazy low.
For your real estate
For
taxes,
real estate taxes
which is a
in
big draw
Greenwich.
for people to want to buy here, I would assume.
Which brings the values up.
Which brings
Right.
those.
So
Right.
it's you're paying one way or another, but if somebody's looking at Bedford or Rye or Greenwich, we love talking about this.
Okay. Makes sense.
Because the real estate taxes are so low. That being said, we're taxed at other areas like personal property, your car, stuff of that nature.
Right.
Now, of course, the difference being, you're going to have to pay a higher mortgage payment because of the higher values, but you can pay off your mortgage. You can't pay off your taxes.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, but on a state, does this come up in conversation with your day to day? Because I mean, Northern Stanford and New Canaan are different. How the taxes work.
Yeah.
So-
It does. When I'm campaigning in Stamford, I hear complaints about the property taxes continuing to go up, and the property. We are 11 mils here, so 1.1% of 70% of $1 million on $1 million home. Well, in Stamford, it's about 28 mils, so it's over 2.5 times higher. Now, the property tax for the same house is going to be lower there, but it's also continuing to go up, and so there's a lot of frustration about. And Stamford, among the major cities in Connecticut, is lower.
Is it?
Yeah,
Is
it
it?
is.
Okay, so the
'Cause
mill
it's
rate
like
of Stamford's-
28 versus, whether you go to New Haven, Bridgeport, Hartford, Waterbury, there's around 40, 50, 60. I think Hartford is 69. I was just looking at it the other week. It's frightening, and it's a downward spiral, right? You lose your economic base. You have to raise taxes. You raise taxes, you lose more of your economic base. So these cities, they're in an economic spiral. Property taxes, income taxes are both two categories of taxes that are much higher here in Connecticut than in other states.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the reason the Greenwich real estate taxes are, without getting into some other stuff, we have all these giant estates, and so a giant estate doesn't have the same draw on the ecosystem
Right.
that a area that has a lot of, relatively smaller estates.
Right.
And so, a $20 million house doesn't have 40 kids. And so it's just it's a relative basis on the draw on the ecosystem, correct?
Yeah, and I think that plus there is still a commercial tax base. So, if you compare it to New Canaan or Darien, they're like 18 or something like that on the mill rate compared to 11 for us. So there's just so many things working in the favor of Greenwich. I think in addition to good local government over many years, responsible budgeting and so on.
State representatives are pretty good,
Better than the state senators, probably. There's definitely several factors, but we have to be very careful because in Greenwich, I think we have, as leaders, as citizens here, we have a great inheritance. I agree with Fred Camillo. This is the best town in the country, but there's a lot of factors that go into that. So protecting, what we have here is an important thing to keep in mind at the local level and at the state level too, because the state can impose upon our towns and cities, and they try to, and they'll continue to try to.
So just to circle back on the electricity conversation.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. It's interesting because I don't know much. I'm learning so much through the conversations that we have and with everyone that sits where you're sitting. But what is the solution here? I think that what people want to hear is there have to be solutions. We can't this is not sustainable financially. So what is the solution? Who makes these decisions? And I'm coming from someone who really doesn't know, and I'm learning, as some of the people in our community are in the same boat. So some know more than others, but what are next steps? Like, how do we solve this?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that, when I talk about this issue, I try not to cast stones. My goal is to lead and provide solutions. the reason I ran for office is because I wanted to solve problems of quality of life in Connecticut and economic barriers and cost of living, and that's the case here too. And so a year and a half ago, I authored a 5-point energy plan that kind of became the Connecticut Republican energy plan for the state, and I've updated it since. And so I republished it in the last couple weeks at a press conference at the state capitol, and it's a 5-point plan that I know will reduce energy costs while also ensuring that there's reliability in the grid and protecting our environment too. So quickly, the 5 points are to move a lot of those public policy charges out of your electricity bill. Second is to cap the level that the state directs procurements of electricity compared to the wholesale competitive market. So currently there are some contracts that we buy energy at that are like 5 times or more than the price of competitively procured power in the market. And I say maybe cap those at 2.5, 3 times the market.
Okay.
Third, we have to make sure we shore up our winter natural gas supply from the west and from the sea and the east. Fourth, I think we want an all of the above clean energy strategy where we make different forms of clean energy compete against each other on things like price rather than just kind of picking the winners and the losers in silos. And fifth, we need a strong regulator who protects our consumers, who has independence, who can evaluate rates transparently in order to protect us from any kind of overreach by the utilities as well. So those are the 5 proposals that I've put forth. And, the good news is in recent couple of weeks, I've seen some of my Democratic colleagues in the House in particular express a high degree of sympathy to some of those proposals. We always try to be bipartisan. I always try to be bipartisan. So, the goal is to solve the problem.
Yeah.
It's not, to say this person said this person wanted this 10 years ago. What a lot of the people who made some of the decisions that are contributing to this, are long gone. So the point is to solve the problems, and I think this is a constructive, actionable plan that can bring us down the right path.
I like that, and thank you for sharing. And from a timing perspective, what does that look like for the consumer?
Well, we called for a special session, so we want to act immediately.
Yeah.
One of the proposals that I co-authored at the beginning of this year in January was to use some of the unspent ARPA money, which is the one-time federal dollars that were given to the states that expired at the end of this year, use some of those dollars to pay off the one-time arrearages, so the unpaid bills that are contributing to your higher rates. That plan was rejected this year, but would have actually reduced kind of the statewide cost to your electricity bills by about $180 million if we used if we used half of the $400 million of ARPA funds. Instead, the state government, the legislature, and the governor decided to use the one-time ARPA monies on other government agencies. So I disagreed with that. So that could have prevented the rates from increasing in this period. But we're kind of past that. There might be $40 million left of that ARPA money. Again, I think it's one-time expenses. One-time funds are better utilized for one-time costs, and this is a case of a one-time cost that's spread across the population. The other things are medium and long-term solutions, which I think is reasonable because we're looking at a long-term sustained problem as well with high rates. So if you move the costs out of the electricity bill and debate them in the normal budgetary process, you're looking at probably a couple of years to see really the benefits mostly fully accrue, but potentially starting next year. If you limit the costs of the new procurements, that's something that can accrue to the benefit of the consumer in the next couple of years too. So I think you're looking at a medium-term plan in terms of relief, plus that $40 million that's still sitting there in one-time funds that could go to relief more immediately.
Fair enough.
How did we get to this place where people that have been paying their bills through COVID and are suddenly getting slammed with double the bill unknowingly? Now that they can see the line item, it's crystal clear to them where that money is being asked for, to fund the public benefits. But, they weren't aware of it as they were paying their bills. And then some people just weren't paying their bills, if I'm not mistaken, from what I've read.
Correct.
And how did that become a reality for consumers.
So during COVID, there was a shut-off moratorium that if you didn't pay your electricity bill, not if you couldn't, if you didn't, which means you could or couldn't. If you chose not to pay your electricity bill for 4 years up until May of 2024, you could not have your electricity shut off by the utilities. So that cost became socialized in the public benefits part of your bill, roughly $180 million of everyone else paying the bills of people who didn't pay their bills and weren't shut off. Now, that I think would have been a reasonable policy towards the beginning of COVID for the first year, maybe first year, and if it was targeted at people who were low income. But it was open-ended, so even if you were a millionaire, theoretically, you could avail yourself of this, and it lasted
without
4
consequence.
Years, without consequence, and
well, FICO credit, right? I mean, can they go after credit or anything like that?
I don't know actually.
Yeah.
I don't know in Connecticut, but then on top of that, most states around us, every state around us didn't have this policy, even though they're similar states in many respects. So they had tens of millions of unpaid bills, where we had hundreds of millions of unpaid bills, and there were people warning about this for a couple of years. So even I think the governor in his press conference recently admitted that this was probably a mistake.
Now, actually, we all talk about our bills going up 100% and all that stuff, but the dollar per kilowatt or whatever it is, how much did that go up? What percent did that go up?
That was so. If you look at how much the increase in rates were responsible for higher bills on average versus the usage, it was probably 10 or 20%.
Okay, so I mean, rates is what I care about. Usage is up to you.
Yeah,
and so rates is really what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
But 10 to 20%, we went up.
Correct.
Okay,
I mean, 10 to 20% of the increase in people's bills was due to the rates. The rates went up by probably a couple of percent. Overall, and those will oscillate from period to period because you have the market price of electricity goes up and down, and programs go in and out. But going back to the beginning of our conversation, it's, I think, most important to look at where we are compared to the rest of the country, where we are, over a long period of time. And it still is clear to me, irrespective of what happened this past month, that our electricity rates are too high, and we can do more to limit costs in the future.
Can it potentially get worse, or is this kind of where we're stuck?
So if people are interested in a longer conversation, I did an hour talk before the Retired Men's Association in Greenwich.
I was teeing you up for an answer. So
in December or January, where I talk about the long-term outlook for the electric grid, the power grid, in the northeastern United States. And it's on my YouTube page. You can just look for Senator Ryan Fazio's YouTube page and go to the title of the talk it's like 3 videos back. It's Will the Lights Go Out on New England? Okay. So I think that hints. I'm very worried that the demand for electricity in the next 20 years is going to go up by much more than our ability to generate it because of heat pumps. So switching to electric heat, more electric vehicles, and data centers are all major sources of increased demand. And I think in the next 10 years, we'll have enough electricity. Costs might still be a problem. But I think in the subsequent 10-year period, you're going to see demand go up so much that we might not have this adequate supply. And so that's where I get even more concerned than where we are now. But I will say this. I think these problems can be solved. These are difficult problems to solve. I believe that they can be solved, and that's why I try to put solutions on the table, rather than just throwing stones.
Yeah, and we obviously don't have anyone from the opposing party to sit here and debate this with us. That's not the point of this interview.
No.
But it's good to hear your point of view on it and the work that you're doing to change things. And I'm sure the majority of consumers appreciate that, because it isn't sustainable. And at the end of the day, most people are going to struggle to be able to afford these increases in their electricity.
Yeah, it's horrible. And I have to say, there are good members of both parties. I see it's something you don't realize until you're up there and you're working with people in person. There are good, smart, hardworking, practical members of both parties, and it's important we have good, smart, practical members of both parties up there as much as possible. And when you're working as intimately on an issue like I have been on this one, you see that there is also difference of opinions within the parties. Like there's members of my party who are a little bit less hard on the utilities than I am, for instance. There are there are members within the Democratic Party in Hartford who understand that we need to probably expand natural gas supply in the region. And they're very pro-nuclear, and there's some are anti-nuclear, anti-gas in the Democratic Party. So there is a diversity within parties, both of styles and of views as well.
Just can't we all just meet in the middle and get along?
I have a strong opinion on electricity, but I don't know if we want to go down that.
Well, let's wrap up by talking about what do the next 85 or so days look like for you?
They look like campaigning and talking to people. Yeah. I knock on a lot of doors.
That's how we got you here. You knocked on our door.
Wait, you're kidding?
No, I didn't. Literally, we had the interview last week that's coming out with Nick, who's running against you for the seat. And then the next day, Ryan was canvassing our neighborhood, and I was working, and Seth called me and said, "You'll never believe it," because we had left that interview saying that we'd really like to talk to Ryan because I'd like to get both sides of the seat here. And he said, "You're never going to believe, but Ryan Fazio came to our door." Like, I believe it, but also it was very serendipitous and coincidental, and that's why you're here. I mean, that's how we met.
No, that's fantastic.
That's what a lot of the next 80 days of
knocking on
life
doors
will look like. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I like to talk to people, meet people. Most importantly, listen to people. That's really what I go to doors to do, to hear what people's ideas are, concerns are, and how I can better represent them.
Fair enough.
And that's what community is all about. That's why we started this podcast, to get to know the people in our community that are making a difference, and also some that are just doing really cool, interesting things. So it was great that happened, and that you're here, and that we get to have this conversation.
So are you really quick, high level, the difference between your job and Fred's job? And are you on the phone with him all day? Is boots on the ground? I mean, just,
and again, for the people that don't know who Fred is.
Fred Camillo.
I am talking to him every day, but it's probably about the Yankees.
No, he's omniscient. I mean, not omniscient. He's omnipresent. Like
he is omnipresent.
He is everywhere.
And I have spoken to him about parking tickets.
So Fred is basically the mayor of Greenwich. He's the first selectman, which is an old New England term for mayor. We have a traditional colonial style of government in Connecticut. So instead of a city council or a town council, we have a representative town meeting as the legislative body. That's the legislative branch of our town government. And then in the executive branch, among other positions, we have the first selectman, who's kind of the head of government, the head of the executive branch. So the town's version of a governor. And so my interaction with the local government is on a lot of kind of discrete, one-off issues. I'm trying to think of the most recent one. The most recent one is we're talking about the potential acquisition of Aquarion Water Company, the water utility, by a public water authority, and how that can actually potentially hurt Greenwich, in part because we would lose, five.
That's on the table.
Yeah, that was a hot topic. If you want to watch another one of my videos, it's a rather annoyed speech of me giving on the Senate floor about this was slipped into a special session piece of legislation 2 days before anyone else. We had to vote on it. But again, potentially the town could lose $500,000 of property tax revenue from it. So, not it's kind of beside the point. But I deal with Fred and other actors in local government on a range of discrete issues where the state and the town come into interaction. Fred's one of the reasons I ran for office in the first place, because I knew Fred since I was a kid. He was my umpire when I was playing baseball in town since I was in Little League. And that's kind of how a lot of this works. It is about community.
It is.
It's about your personal relationships with the community, people in it. And that's how I got involved, because of in part because I went to Fred and I went to Scott Franz, who previously held the seat, both of whom I knew, and said, this is in my heart. I want to get involved. What do you think? And they've helped kind of, guide me through the process, among many others like Libby Floor and Bill Nickerson and so on, who are, really good people in the community and their heart's in the right place. And, that's ultimately the reason that, I love the job I have too, because it's home.
I can't fathom Fred's schedule. I mean, every event
It's
that I
very
go to,
impressive.
he's there. every restaurant I go to, he's there. I mean, I can't. I mean,
I saw him last on the Avenue sidewalk sales. He was shopping at Vineyard Vines, and he really is a man of the people. I see him everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know what he puts in his coffee in the morning, but it's impressive.
Yeah, he's just totally kinetic. He's ubiquitous, as you said. And,
He is.
that's why he's able to do a good job, because he knows the people. He knows
he's in the community.
this job is
Right.
so much in his bones.
Right.
It's who he is. He wasn't born for it, but he was made for it, because he's been in this community his whole life, and he's invested so much time in getting to know as many people as possible and as many issues as possible. But it's because Greenwich is in his bones.
love it.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for taking
Thank
the
you for
time
coming.
to be with us today. It's been so interesting to talk with both you and the candidate who's running against you this fall. Thank you. And if there's anything else that we missed, anything you want to say,
It's okay.
we'll put your YouTube channel in the show notes so that everyone knows how to find it. You can find us online on Instagram, Building Greenwich CT, and we also have a YouTube channel, Building Greenwich CT. info@greenwichct.com if you'd like to reach out to us to be on the show. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you.
And where do they go if they want to learn more about you?
They can go to my Instagram page, Ryan Fazio CT. My Facebook page, I think, is Ryan Fazio. My YouTube page, I don't know what it is.
Ryan Fazio.
Or they can sign up to my newsletters at senatorfazio.com, where I try to put out periodic informational content on what's going on with the state government.
Fantastic. Thanks for
Love it.
joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a treat.
Bye.